Welcome to Regulatory Ramblings. Our guests today, Channing Mavrellis and John Cassara, are the authors of a new report entitled Made in China, China's Role in Transnational Crime and Illicit Financial Flows. The report delves into mainland China's role in 4 different transnational crime areas: drug trafficking, counterfeiting, IP theft, human trafficking, and wildlife trafficking, as well as the illicit financial flows associated with such crimes, as well as what the international community can do to better understand and combat these activities, including some policy prescriptions. It was published by Global Financial Integrity, or GFI, a Washington, D.C. based think tank focused on corruption, illicit trade, money laundering, and abuses of the world's banking and financial system. Channing is GFI's illicit trade director, and John Cassara is a GFI board member and previously a special agent with the US Treasury Department. And with that, I will turn it over to you. Thank you for joining us.
Our pleasure. You see anything and everything that can be sold is being counterfeited. And so, I mean, anything from, I think a lot of people think of, fake luxury goods, Louis Vuitton. You also have fake Nike shoes, but you have kind of more insidious things, baby formula. You have electronics, chips, things that go into military supply chains or into high-tech goods, and counterfeit pharmaceuticals are also really up there. So there's a study a few years ago. China and Hong Kong accounted for about 86% of globally traded counterfeits. So, and we're not talking about the domestic trade in China and Hong Kong. We're talking about the global trade of goods from there. It would have an estimated value of about $438 billion as of 2020. In regards to IP theft, intellectual property theft, they're responsible for about 50 to 80% of international IP theft. IP is particularly a touchy subject for many foreign governments or many countries, as well as the private sector. The Chinese government relies on both soft and hard approaches to obtain intellectual property. They encourage Chinese citizens, or sometimes require Chinese citizens who work and study abroad, to engage in commercial espionage. They'll use vehicles such as joint ventures, research partnerships, and sales and trading investments to collect that information. And they also have a state policy of forced technology transfer. I do want to emphasize, though, that technology transfer is not necessarily a bad thing when it comes to, particularly for developing countries, to gain the knowledge and the skills to improve kind of their developments. However, at a certain level, it becomes predatory. Chinese IP legislation, the biggest challenge with that is that it's founded around the idea of first to file. So that is, the law protects whomever is the first to file the patent versus who actually came up with the invention first, which is particularly challenging, especially for smaller companies who may not have the financial resources to compete in court, or maybe not compete, but to pursue the issue in court. China has undertaken comprehensive reforms of its IP regime between 2018 and 2020. But again, you still have issues in terms of enforcement largely being focused on the sale of counterfeits. So the actual sale, so focusing on like the e-commerce platforms. There's been a lot of regulation of them in terms of strengthening penalties against platforms if they don't have secure enough compliance and protocols to prevent the sale or prevent vendors from selling counterfeits. There's very little evidence of China actually going after the actual manufacturers of counterfeit goods. And this is also seen when it comes to drug trafficking as well. Instead of going after those companies that manufacture the chemical precursors and the pharmaceuticals, intentionally manufacture them for the illicit trade, they're going after the platforms. Right. So given the IP, the scale of IP crime in China, it's reasonable to conclude that the counterfeiting represents a relatively important share of China's economy. So in 2007, Euromonitor estimated that counterfeit products accounted for about 15 to 20% of products made in China. So this represented 8% of China's GDP. Obviously, the estimate is 15 years old, but counterfeiting has, at the very least, remained stable, if not grown over those years. So assuming counterfeiting still represents about 8% of China's GDP, this would be equal to nearly about $1.2 trillion in 2020. And what you can kind of postulate from there is that, considering the significant economic implications of this, you kind of see what's happening is probably a potential cost benefit analysis with Chinese officials of the willingness of them to actually crack down on counterfeiting, which would obviously be very ideal to the international community, as well as to, put a really good dent against transnational crime and illicit financial flows. But it would also put a not so meager number of Chinese citizens out of work, and obviously have a very strong impact on the economy.
Well, hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, AJ, and thank you, Channing. First of all, I'd like to thank our audience for listening in. I believe this topic has struck a chord. It's resonated with a lot of people and a lot of institutions. I hope this paper will begin the process of evaluating and calling attention to China's outsized role in transnational crime and international money laundering. First of all, I'd like to call out Channing here. She is the chief author, or she had the chief pen on this paper. I tinkered around the edges a little bit. GFI very generously put my name on it, but this is Channing's work. And I'm very proud to be associated with it. That being said, I'm doing some of my own research on China right now, my own project. And I have three brief kind of general takeaways that I'd like to leave with you. The first is, up to now, we've seen individual cases or examples of China's, say, criminality, Chinese active criminality. But what we're missing, I believe, is the big picture. The totality, the enormity of Chinese transnational crime and money laundering, to me, is just absolutely staggering. I've been in this business for over 30 years. I've never seen anything like it. The average citizen, wherever you are, the United States, overseas, might be somewhat aware that the African elephant or the rhinoceroses are endangered because of China's demand for ivory, or tropical forests are being destroyed to satisfy the insatiable demand for Chinese wood products, or some might have knowledge of China's the largest manufacturing source of illicit tobacco products, or others may have experienced being priced out of their own local housing market because of suspicious Chinese capital flight. The definition of money laundering that I use, we're very familiar with it, is the hiding or the disguising the proceeds of any form of criminal proceeds. And the key word there is any. And when you talk about any, you're talking about specified unlawful activities. So that's what Channing and I were looking at, these various SUAs, money laundering. So looking at internationally accepted data that covers specified unlawful activities, roughly speaking, China is responsible for about half the money laundered every year globally if you analyze specified unlawful activities. Now, to come up with that half, very, very briefly, people in the audience know that the magnitude, the estimate of how much international money laundering out there is literally all over the map. But we normally accept the IMF's very round numbers, their estimate that roughly 2 to 5% of world GDP, or again, round number, approximately $4 trillion a year is the proceeds of crime. Of course, it depends what's included in the count. For example, some countries' jurisdictions, they count tax evasion, others do not. Capital flight, underground financial systems. Some of these were included in that IMF estimate, others not. This paper looked at about 4, but there are another, say, 5 or 6, and Channing did some really, really good work on, the top, I think there were 10 or 11 SUAs that Channing looked at a number of years ago, where there's no doubt Chinese criminality kind of leads the world. And if you total them up, it's an easy $2 trillion a year. So using $4 trillion as that rough estimate of how much money laundering is going on in the world, that's why I come up with about half of the money laundered every year, focusing on SUAs, specified unlawful activities, comes back to China. It's also important to examine what I call China-centric money laundering methodologies, or money laundering methodologies with quote unquote Chinese characteristics. So in the world of AML, the Financial Action Task Force has made known that it feels like there are 3 major international money laundering methodologies: 1 through banks, 2 bulk cash, and 3 trade-based money laundering. There's certainly many more than that. Law enforcement uses the expression laundering money is only limited by the criminal's imagination. But there are some uniquely Chinese ways of laundering money, or where China's become the dominant player. We touch on some of these in the paper, but Chinese actors are becoming the money launderers of choice in, for example, the Western Hemisphere. Let me talk very briefly about the black market peso exchange. I'm not going to describe it, except to say that for years now, the US Treasury has felt that the black market peso exchange is perhaps one of the largest money laundering methodologies in the Western Hemisphere. But that same methodology is not just confined to the Western Hemisphere. You can find Chinese involvement in black market exchanges literally around the world. They use some of the same trade-based money laundering techniques literally around the world. Another Chinese-centric methodology that is not well known in the West, but should be, is flying money by Chen. Similar to Hawala, that's better known in the West because of its ties to terror finance. Historically and culturally, flying money uses trade and the process of countervaluation, over and under invoicing, is a means of balancing books between brokers. Done this for well over 1,000 years, since the Tang Dynasty, the 700-800 AD. Although normally used for money remittances, because it's so opaque and secretive, flying money is also used by criminals and criminal networks. Almost impervious to detection by our traditional AML countermeasures, particularly financial intelligence. And of course, black market exchanges and flying money are just subsets of trade-based money laundering, TBML. Actually, trade fraud, or customs fraud, is the largest component of TBML, and similarly, abusive trade misinvoicing is the biggest element of illicit financial flows, or IFFs, and this is something that GFI, the study of IFFs is something that GFI has pioneered. China is the world's largest trading nation, and although this has never been systematically examined, it should be. If just a small percentage of Chinese trade is involved with trade-based value transfer and underground finance, even forms of capital flight, then you can easily add hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars a year in addition to that SUA total we were talking about. Another China-centric money laundering methodology is underground banking, sometimes known as CUBS, Chinese underground banking systems. Loose-knit network of money dealers, traders, cryptocurrency brokers who move currencies in and out of the economy while sidestepping the country's regulated banking systems and currency controls and capital flight restrictions. And Chinese authorities themselves admit that there are significant illicit proceeds that flow out of the country through these underground banking operations. Chinese money launderers also frequently use gaming or casino gambling. This has been documented in British Columbia via the Cullum Commission of Inquiry. Fascinating research has been done into this, and I encourage anybody that's interested to get online and to review the Cullen Commission's stellar investigative findings about the Chinese-centric Vancouver method of money laundering. There are many other heavily Chinese-influenced money laundering methodologies, facilitators and enablers. And some of the most popular ones includes the very popular use in China of offshores and secrecy jurisdictions, certainly corruption. Corruption by itself is an SUA for money laundering, the use of espionage, organized crime, CCP-sponsored programs that target and lure those with information useful to China, the proliferation of China-controlled free trade zones, lack of Chinese international money laundering enforcement and law enforcement cooperation in general, and a poor record of AML compliance. Now, some of these were briefly addressed in the papers and others not. But as I said, in the world of AML enforcement, China's involvement's been overlooked far too long. And once again, I think GFI papers breaking new ground in calling attention to China's involvement in transnational crime and international money laundering.
You know, what, I mean, the report is airtight. You cover a lot of ground, and you certainly cover your bases. So I can't refute much of what you say, because a lot of it dovetails with what I covered as a journalist for Thomson Reuters on the financial crime and corruption beat for close to 7 years. But I mean, when your report came out, you had people even here, and playing devil's advocate, I mean, there are going to be people presenting the pro-China point of view, which is largest economy on Earth, or second largest economy on Earth in nominal terms, largest economy in purchasing power parity, developing nation, over 1 billion people. Against that backdrop, is it surprising that there's not at least some link to China, or some of that, a good portion of that crime is naturally going to emanate out of China because it's so large and it's developing and there's a lot of money sloshing around, and it's undergoing its own internal revolutions of sorts. So what are your thoughts on that? Or is it there's something uniquely bad because of the structure of the society, that being authoritarian state, and they can clamp down on a lot of it if they wanted to, but I think, I mean, I don't know if you came out and said this, but much of this serves the state's end.
Yeah, so I think, part of the, as you pointed out, the size of the country, the population, I think some of that comes into play. I mean, when you look at large economies and populations, there's definitely aspects of that that can help itself facilitate the crime. So, if the economy is so large, and China has gone through tremendous economic development internally, and also is pushing it very much so internationally. But if the economy is that large, there's going to be important industries that are involved, as we've talked about already, manufacturing. We've talked about as well construction, which is playing a very large role externally. And I'll just plug here and hopefully later, my colleague Lakshmi Kumar is GFI's policy director. She and a peer from University College of London, King's College London, they have published out today, if you go to our website, gfintegrity.org, they've published a review of China's Belt and Road Initiative and its connections to illicit financial flows and trade-based money laundering. So I highly recommend that. It's right on the front page, gfintegrity.org. We go back to the regularly scheduled programming. So, I mean, if you have such a large economy, you're going to have the industries that could be used and abused, like we're seeing. And you're going to have the infrastructure that's going to facilitate all of the movement of the goods. And so that's particularly something you see here. China has, correct me if I'm wrong, John, 4 of the 5 largest ports. So you have massive trade going on there. And, one estimate puts about 80% of international cargo is moved by containers. And less than 2% of that is inspected. So China's facing the problem that everybody faces in terms of it's a numbers game, and a lot of times the desire for trade facilitation wins out over this efforts to fight or combat illicit financial flows or transnational crime. It's kind of impossible, and that's a given for any country. But I think, you know, for us, a lot of this is related to the dynamics of the governments. You know, you look at the CCP. It's policies clearly that they're pushing right now to be an economic and geopolitical powerhouse. There's been allegations in Canada that China has funded candidates, you know, in political elections in the Canadian government, as well as a lot of issues going on in terms of debt reliance, kind of economic leverage that is going on through the Belt and Road Initiative and other activities. The authoritarian nature by far and an extension of that, the surveillance state. I mean, they're able to shut down Twitter, they're able to shut down websites, you know, parts of the internet, no problem. And so when you compare that to, you know, their choice of, you know, targeting just the platforms that sell counterfeits, or when we talk about narcotics trafficking, just the platforms that, you know, like an Alibaba. When you talk about that, you know, with those websites that allow, you know, kind of like your Amazon marketplace for the sale of these goods, they also have the ability to very easily target any website. Do a search term, shut this thing down. They're making choices, and I think some of it's a cost benefit analysis in terms of it'll be more hurtful for their economy to shut down, like I said, manufacturing of counterfeits than it would be to actually pursue shutting down, you know, that aspect of transnational crime. If you look at things like, I think some of it is also the ability, you know, there's definitely other countries involved in this. The US is obviously known for being the largest, you know, destination country for narcotics. But if you look at the government, they are continuously acting towards combating international trafficking or narcotics trafficking, both domestic and abroad. And this is seen through a considerable amount of money going into, for example, and I'm not saying this is maybe the most effective use of money, but things like Plan Colombia, they put a considerable amount of training in other governments. They put a lot of money and effort and resources into this. You don't see that in other areas. You know, with China, you're not seeing kind of a similar response. The same thing I would say with ivory and ivory carving is very similar in terms of it took a very high level decision to shut down ivory and ivory carving in China. And even then, you know, there's still some issues here and there. It's not as easy in the US to shut something down in terms of, you know, the executive or legislative or even judicial branch. There's a lot of checks and balances. There's a lot of, you know, layers there to, you know, preserve democracy. And so it's not as easy to go through and shut down a particular activity. I think a lot of people point to the US in terms of issues with guns. Particularly, the U.S. does supply a lot of guns in you know, Latin America. I would compare kind of the gun issue in terms of its ties to American history and its importance to some Americans in terms of identity or their rights. Ivory is very similar. It's a very large part of Chinese culture. Ivory carving has been recognized by the government. But if you look at how much the US struggles to try to put any effort to control the gun trade, it's not so simple. We don't have the ability to just say no, and we're going to get rid of all these guns. Whereas China does have the ability as an authoritarian state to really shut down industries and activities.
And I think a corollary to that is, given the evolved surveillance state, I mean they've got their kill switches. If they wanted to shut something down, they could.
I mean, it would be an oversimplification to say that they're responsible for everything in the country. There's obviously always going to be non-state actors involved in this that are working against the government's or the CCP's desires, but they have, let's say, a overwhelming majority of, they have the ability or a monopoly of power on the country in terms of knowing what's going on and being able to, having the agency to act sometimes quickly and severely against it.
Certainly, they have to keep they have to keep a growing number of people employed. I mean that the regimes. I mean that
something all governments worry about.
Yeah. Yep. So,
I'd like to,
please,
if I may, I'd just like to add one quick point which kind of reinforces some of this, and that is some people say, particularly in these times of political correctness, it's not correct to single out China, but I don't look at it that way. Because I go back a long ways. I started the anti-money laundering fight, if you will, way back in 1990 when I was a young criminal investigator for the Department of Treasury. And at that time, we were singling out Colombia. Later on, we were singling out Mexico. At the fall of the wall, we were singling out Russia. If you look from the United States perspective, we have so many issues with, say, ethnic-based gangs, Salvadorian gangs, Jamaican gangs, this type of stuff. I spent 6 years of my life in Italy combating Italian-American organized crime, the mafia, targeting Italy, right? So the point is that—
especially given your own background.
Pardon?
Especially given your own background.
Exactly. The point I'm trying to make, though, if we can talk about Colombia and Russia and Mexico and Italy and whatever else, why can't we talk about China? And so that's where I'm coming from.
That's a fair point. Which, I mean, and here when we look at China and Hong Kong as being a part of Greater China, I mean, having grown up here, I've known from the 80s how complicit Hong Kong was in IP violations, and it goes all the way back to people in the Indian community in the import-export business sending counterfeit games to the States. They would just write video games on the manifest. The more details you gave, the more suspicious customs would tend to get. And they'd send counterfeit games, and they would understate the value of those games. This was in the era before the WTO, GATT trips, higher tariffs. You get the picture. So you were skirting tariffs, you were underpaying tariffs, and you were getting around IP laws. Hong Kong's been complicit, but I mean, beyond that, I mean, when it comes to higher level frauds and malfeasance, I mean, what we've often found is that bad behavior in China often traces back to enterprises in Hong Kong. Yet when you look at Transparency International, their corruption rankings, Hong Kong always gets a better score than mainland China. So to what extent is Hong Kong complicit? I mean, I think you've elucidated how bad it is, or Hong Kong's role in the IP violations context, but any thoughts?
So I would like to share another ranking which is Tax Justice Network. And every few years they put out the Financial Secrecy Index. So it came out this year in 2022. Hong Kong ranks fourth. First is the US, but it ranks fourth on in the index, which ranks jurisdictions most complicit in helping individuals hide their finances from the rule of law. And this could be from any source. It could be tax evasion. It can be from crimes, IP theft, anything. China was rated 11. So Hong Kong has a worse rating when it comes to financial secrecy than China does. I think one thing, getting to these enterprises that you're talking about is Hong Kong overall has maintained loose incorporation laws. They allow non-residents to set up anonymous companies with ease. This has been proven to have been taken advantage of by North Koreans and by other criminals. The North Koreans being in an attempt to get around sanctions, as well as just to get hard currency, for them through a lot of times criminal activities. I think sometimes Hong Kong can be a comfortable medium for the West between China, in terms of, the region has had historic links to get to London and the UK, and I think they maybe creates a perception that it's more Western friendly, or people might feel more comfortable with it, and those might feel more comfortable holding their money there. These good relations with the West can extend to Western-based financial institutions, which may view the jurisdiction as a lower risk than China. And connected to that is, Hong Kong might be more appealing than to Chinese mainlanders, because they may have an easier time moving their money abroad via Hong Kong than if they did it directly from China. And one other thing to keep in mind with Hong Kong in terms of Europe and the West is it really blew up in the early 2010s. Swiss banks around that time started facing a lot more transparency reforms. Switzerland has always been known as a secrecy jurisdiction. They're losing some of that bad reputation in a good way, in providing more transparency. But a lot of these banks look to open branches in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a negligible corporate tax rate. There's non-existent taxes on capital gains, interest, and dividends. It's an ideal jurisdiction for offshore banking. A lot of times too, Hong Kong does not levy a withholding tax. Most tax havens with EU-based clients are required to levy a 35% interest earned by offshore assets. Hong Kong does not do that. So it provides a very friendly environment for all to engage in either, if they're wanting to hide their money from taxes, if they want to use it kind of as a comfortable intermediary for transactions, because you see it both for financial transactions as well as a stopover for actual physical goods. It's something we have to, GFI has to take into our account with methodology when we do our annual reports, because there is so much flow of goods in and out of Hong Kong with re-invoicing. It's a matter you have to take into account of goods kind of just staying there temporarily and then leaving again. It can affect our numbers, so it plays an important role for sure.
Oh, definitely. Re-exports can really distort the picture, and it struck me for a long time that what is the purpose of places like Hong Kong and Macau, really? I mean, it's to enable you to do what you can't do in mainland China proper. Specifically, money laundering is the obvious one, tax evasion, outflows of forex above prescribed limits, and then in Macau you've got the added factor of gambling, which they don't allow in China. So, John, you wanted to chime in?
I'm not really qualified to talk about this topic because I don't have that much expertise in today's Hong Kong. And AJ, kind of like you, before the PRC takeover, I was aware that crime in the business world of mainland China was often facilitated by Hong Kong. I just don't know how much has changed, if any, or if at all, with the new PRC assertiveness. Then I echo what Channing was saying. I'm certain that Hong Kong's role as a major trading hub and involvement in trade-based money laundering definitely remains a concern. One thing that certainly hasn't changed is the presence of, say, for example, Chinese organized crime. And from a law enforcement perspective, that's a huge issue. But I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, the 13K and the Sun Yeon triad gangs are well known, and we're seeing it in terms of the amount of hot cash from mainland China that's flowing into real estate. They don't care about the stamp duties and the additional taxes they might have to face being outsiders, because they want their money in a safe jurisdiction. And of course, then it becomes an artificial economy.
Doing business, yeah.
Yeah, cost of doing
doing business.
And we know that a launderer will spend up to 30 cents on the dollar to get their money out of Colombia or a war zone into Miami. I mean, so yeah, I mean, it distorts the cost price structure of things. And if Westerners want to move out of high rent office space in Central District, mainland firms will just come. I mean, it's with China. The thing for the world to watch is the numbers, and it's still, as we saw in World War II, Russia, the Soviet Union versus the Nazis. At some point, the numbers make a difference, as Stalin said. Quantity has a quality all its own. I mean, that's why it feels so. Yeah, it's so relentless. So this being a financial hub, we have to address what this means for compliance officers and in-house counsel and financial crime professionals, money laundering reporting officers, and the like at banking and financial institutions. What's their central takeaway? Why should your report matter to them and keep them on edge?
John, you want to take a stab at this first?
Sure. I've done some training with compliance officers of the United States and elsewhere, for that matter. What strikes me is the crying need that compliance officers have for training. Things that seem apparent to me, perhaps as my background as a criminal investigator, I've sometimes struck that that they are unaware of certain things that I just take for granted that people know. Let's put it that way. So I think this paper serves an important role because it hopefully shines a light on a problem they may not have been aware of. And it's just a continuing process of heightening awareness, getting a dialogue going. This isn't going to, make change that much, but it's at least hopefully will get the dialogue started and start people thinking about some of these issues. Channing?
So I'm just going to add on to John's comment. I think as both John, me talking about kind of the physical, talking about the movement of goods, him talking about the movement of money, there's a huge importance of trade in both of these aspects, the movement of goods and financial flows in China. And so I think adding on to the compliance side is the importance of cross-training trade finance, the trade finance side of this. So making sure those that are engaged in trade finance at financial institutions, those officers have the same training as compliance officers. He's seeing a lack of, and I agree with him, a lack of awareness among compliance professionals and some of these red flag indicators. If you're seeing a challenge on the compliance side, there's even worse problems on the trade finance side. I really think there's not this understanding, with trade finance, they're looking to, is this a sound financial decision for our institution to provide this letter of credit or to provide whatever trade finance instrument, to the importer or exporter? Is this sound? They're going to look through sanctions lists and make sure that the good is not a dual use good, that the good, the people involved or the countries involved aren't sanctioned. But we found, and this is, both working with, talking with and working with, financial institutions, is the trade finance side has a very poor training on red flag indicators related to illicit financial flows. So one case that I came across in my research, and it's not related to China, but I think it really illustrates this issue, is you have an export of live cattle from Brazil to Nigeria, and it's going to Abuja. And so you have a trade finance, somebody on one side of the transaction has applied for trade finance. And the method of moving these live cattle from Brazil to Nigeria is by airplane, is what the person has applied for. John already knows. I mean, that's the most expensive way to move any commodity. So you're going to be reserving it either if you need goods quick or if they're very valuable. And so the entity within Nigeria that's importing them is a restaurant. And so there's this question of, compliance goes through and they're like, oh, okay, everything looks good. There's money to back this. Brazil, Nigeria, cattle, everything's good. Trade finance goes through, everything's fine. The compliance says, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. So they go back to the client and they say, you're doing cattle by airplane? They said, no. It's actually maritime, but it's still going to Abuja. Abuja is a landlocked destination. It should be going to Lagos. Why are they, so there's this lack of questioning. Why are they sending live cattle versus, pre-butchered beef? Why does a restaurant, need to import all of this live cattle? So there could be legitimate reasons. We do see the export of live cattle from South America, particularly to the Middle East, to be butchered there, to keep it with halal butchering and to keep with particular times of the year for festivals and holidays. However, you need to question all of this, or another example would be getting trade finance to send, again, via airplane, a bunch of paper straws. So you don't see that critical thinking and awareness of red flags, of typologies, of methodologies on the trade finance side. I think a lot of this can help. What's important as well is to have a really solid KYC foundation for clients so that financial institutions can better detect irregularities in the financial transactions. And part of this is also just having them, and this kind of gets to, a question you'd posed as well in terms of human trafficking, having financial institutions be better aware of the dynamics of the crimes so they, as well as partners, can help build methodologies, extract important indicators from this and red flags that can be applied to compliance platforms. And so there's efforts to get underway in this, but there's, still challenges.
I mean, one quote I like to read out: pairing the International Labor Organization's average annual profit of $5,000 per victim in the Asia Pacific region with the Global Slavery Index's estimated 3.8 million trafficking victims in China gives a rough estimate of the value of human trafficking in China at $19 billion. Yet to this day, banks will say it's hard. There are certain industries, fisheries, shipping, mining, the extractive industries. Okay, those need to, from a CDD, enhanced KYC perspective, those need extra attention. But it's hard for banks to pick up on indicia of human trafficking, they would say. But recently Chainalysis, a company in the crypto space, had, devised a way of them being able to ferret out kiddie porn. So there are innovations out there, but I'm not quite sure if everyone in compliance is necessarily availing themselves of, the state-of-the-art technology that might be able to help them.
Definitely I'm pleased with the growing awareness of this, for sure.
This was revealed at a recent fintech event in Dubai that I attended. So the technology is there now.
I would say there's technology, and then there's also an appreciation and a willingness, which is, I think the willingness is the biggest part of doing this, because a lot of when it comes to financial institutions and their compliance protocols, a lot of it is going to be motivated by what's required by them from regulators. And a lot of them, though, have been picking up the issue of human trafficking. Project Protect in Canada, it was launched by the private sector actually in 2016, and it was actually launched in response to a challenge by a human trafficking victim who challenged financial institutions to do more when it came to trafficking in persons, to human trafficking. So they, with Canada's FIU, with FinTrack, they created a PPP with the financial institutions, with regulators, law enforcement agencies, civil society, tech firms, to really try to address human trafficking. Part of this came from developing and publishing typologies and red flag indicators associated with human trafficking that financial institutions could incorporate into their protocols. It included creating a tick box specifically on STRs or SARs to indicate potential human trafficking. You have great organizations. There's a US-based organization called Polaris. They've done extensive work looking at different industries and red flag indicators for human trafficking. And, they did a really good one on illicit massage business in the US. So I highly recommend checking out Polaris Project. One thing that's challenging, though, sometimes when it comes to human trafficking, is a lot of the red flag indicators relate to the activities that the victims, that indicate a potential victim. So things like frequent late night Ubers or taxis, frequent stays in hotels, moving around every week or so, access to pharmacies, late night food orders. They've come up with red flags that identify victims. But there hasn't been as much in terms of helping to identify the traffickers themselves. And so I think there's also a better appreciation when I talked about financial institutions, and I think the public in general. I've seen this in the US. This isn't Liam Neeson and Taken. This isn't some kind of international, kind of dynamic where, a girl's kidnapped and then she's auctioned off. It's very much at a local level a lot of times, and it's involving neighbors and family and friends. It's not as high profile as it may be made to be seen. So I think there's definitely a greater appreciation and willingness and awareness by financial institutions. You're still going to face challenges. Some of this is still heavily cash based. And you also may have challenges with, mobile payments through like WeChat or Alipay, when we're talking specifically with China and the Chinese diaspora. But it's definitely seen a really good move towards, trying to tackle this head on.
Some ways it seems worse because if it's street level, if it's friends and family and whatnot, and then this could be happening in any neighborhood, right?
I think that's a greater appreciation. I see it all the time in the US kind of local news articles. This, oh my God, it's in our neighborhood. It's like, yes, it is. So, it's not to say you don't have larger trafficking networks. This is true for any crime. If we're talking narcotics, some can be very low level operations that have maybe one outlet, for a source that's not very widely connected. And you can see it as well for, human trafficking. It's probably going to be more at a national level or domestic level in terms of it might stay kind of that low level. But they also need to be able to detect international trafficking as well. And so that's something I think that there's definitely, I'm seeing in terms of a lot of AML. I mean, AML was kind of founded around drug trafficking. A lot of the policies are there to detect that. But the fact is that any of the methodologies used to launder narcotics proceeds can be used for any other crime. But in terms of a lot of we look at other transnational crimes, I see human trafficking pulling in, as a second or third in terms of financial institutions trying to combat it proactively. They're getting more involved with wildlife trafficking, and there's efforts to get them more involved as well with other forms of environmental crimes.
Okay. One more quote. Since from 2007 to 2008, the Chinese shadow banking system has mushroomed into a $10 trillion obscure financial system that connects thousands of financial institutions with companies, local governments, and hundreds of millions of households. You add, similarly, the methods used to launder illicit proceeds of Chinese origin, as well as the methods used by illicit Chinese actors, are both strongly linked to each other, as well as Chinese culture and the economy. For example, there's a strong symbiotic relationship between Chinese underground banking, fei qian, trade-based money laundering, and illicit capital flight. But, I mean, dealing with that in a society that, yes, China is ahead of Hong Kong in many respects in digital payments. You see that on the street, even in the wet markets. But it's a society that, generally speaking, likes to deal in cash. It's a closed society, certainly in terms of the Chinese communities overseas. That level of ethnocentrism then would seem to be a barrier to efforts by law enforcement to penetrate those circles and find out what's really going on. It's really opaque. And it's often said the oldest tricks are the best, and they're only trusting their own kind.
AJ, I think that's an excellent point. I know the United States has been struggling with these underground remittance and underground financial systems for years. The catalyst, probably the events surrounding 9/11. Our focus in the US has been on combating Hawala. And similar to flying money, Hawala is based on trust. It's opaque. It's very ethnocentric.
Yeah.
Our countermeasures have not worked, quite frankly. And Hawala, flying money, almost impervious to our primary anti-money laundering countermeasure, which is financial intelligence. And with flying money, it's even worse. The West is almost unaware. Regarding a culture that likes to deal with cash in money laundering, as we all know, cash is king. I find fascinating that in a perverse kind of way, China's moved towards mobile wallets, a national cryptocurrency, and social monitoring it's kind of slowly going to erode, if not end, the role of cash. I imagine that the government's doing it for control purposes and also to crack down on capital flight. Now, the law enforcement side of me thinks that's great. Kind of the civil libertarian side of me is absolutely appalled. But anyway, that's another issue. But I think this whole topic is just fascinating.
So, lastly, before we let you go, it is election day, and your report came out in late October, and at a time when U.S.-China relations are touchy. I don't know, some might see a report like this as inflaming tensions, but I mean, going back to what you were saying about, or what you were alluding to about China being treated with kid gloves, that you're allowed to talk about everyone else except China. Yeah, that perception exists, that in certain quarters that they're being picked on. But what are your thoughts? I mean, is a report like this going to help inform policy making, or is it going to feed into the emotions of partisan politics?
I would say so. It definitely wasn't planned to come out around now. This was largely just a matter of me finding time in my schedule. GFI's produced a lot of reports. We're about 11 staff members, so we all wear about different hats. So this was more about, I had a moment to breathe and get this out and work on it. So this has actually been a couple of years in the making in terms of working on this. I would say the contents aren't necessarily revelatory in terms of, you are quite familiar with those. So those kind of work in this field that either work in human trafficking or narcotics or IFFs. What we're saying isn't necessarily super surprising to them, but I think particularly for policymakers, this is something that's important for them to understand. I would say you mentioned the timing now, but the US government, particularly Congress, has already held several hearings about China's role in transnational crime and IFFs over the last, year or two. It's China, kind of moved from, focus country number one to number two with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So there's still interest there. It's actually, I think, a topic that has generally a bipartisan agreement, both Republican and Democratic sides. They might come from it from different perspectives in terms of, Republicans might come from a more of, China potentially could be a threat to our economy. Democrats might come as, okay, potential issues with use of, forced human labor in our supply chains. But I think there's general bipartisan agreement that China is a serious, it requires serious consideration on how we interact with them. And this is, it's continued right now with Biden. A lot of this stuff was started under Trump. And so it's nothing super new. It isn't, we're not naming and shaming anyone in particular, or this isn't an investigative report where we've called out individuals or companies. We're just highlighting everything was with open source public. So it's not, anything that, I don't find it too crazy, but I think it was important to really put together to show the totality and the impact of what's really going on, instead of discussing this kind of as a piecemeal by particular crime or by flow, issue.
Yeah, and what I appreciate about your report was, again, a lot of this was already out there, but you consolidated a great deal of data and information into one source and helped us see some of the interconnections. So that is appreciated. Channing Mavrellis, John Cassara, thank you for joining us.